All right. Good morning, Doug. If people have been following us for a while, they know we've talked about, I guess you could call it the Trump reset, Trump's economic plan, where it was clear months ago that tariffs were going to be a big instrument to bludgeon other countries into agreeing to a new economic order. The idea is to reindustrialize America, reshore jobs. Has lots of positive implications if they could pull it off. And I think that's been proved true by by Liberation Day, all these tariffs that are out there, that this clearly is a plan of theirs, and they're very serious about it. But it's also become obvious that there's a wrinkle to the plan that I was not as obvious at first, and this has to do with national security. So, um, yeah, first of all, Doug, do you have any comment on that before I can go deeper in it?
Yeah, this whole concept of national security impresses me as, quite frankly, bullshit. There is no national security. It doesn't exist. If the Russians or the Chinese, or for that matter, even the North Koreans, launched a nuclear attack against the US, there's no national security. They're not going to be able to stop any significant portion of those missiles. So the US would turn into a smoky ruin. Forget about national security there. It doesn't exist. So if they launch a bio attack against the US, there's no security. There's no stopping that. If they launched a cyber attack, which would result in the infrastructure of the US from utilities to the electrical grid to everything on down, there's no security. They can't stop that. So what is this national security stuff? How does any of this have to do with national security? And the more you think about it, it's really about governmental security. I mean, it's something that's in these people's heads that has nothing to do with the average citizen. And forget about national security. Everything that they do for the defense industry, it's not about defense. It's actually the opposite of defense. Well, they shouldn't have changed it anyway from the War Department to the Defense Department. I mean, these people never like to call anything by what it is. And this is part of the general psychic war, which has been going on for some time, where you change the words and you change the meaning of words, and it makes it impossible for people to think clearly about them because we never define these words as to what they really mean. So anyway, I just want to call bullshit on this whole idea of national security and defense, uh, which it's not. So I guess that's kind of my opening comment.
Okay.
In addition to the fact that these things are bankrupting the U.S., forget about all the other negative consequences.
Right. And but as a testament or one indicator, one data point we have that national security is a priority is that Trump announced $1 trillion budget for the Defense Department.
Wait a minute,
Now,
I thought he was supposed to be cutting spending.
there's that. But there are priorities. So apparently, and I guess one of the main arguments I think that I would make today is that everything is driven by this national security imperative. Now, I don't think it's American security or America well-being. I don't think that's actually the way that they think of this imperative. I think the imperative is fundamentally is that the U.S. should be able to do as it pleases. And you might, as an American, think that that's great. You might think that that's or neutral. But I think that that is the imperative that is driving everything that we see today. And it's been decided, and I'm not sure exactly by whom, but it's been decided that China is the problem. And you might not like China. You might actually believe that China is the problem. But I think if you looked into it further, you'd have a little more questions about it. Maybe do they have to be a problem? But they certainly, in economic power, they've grown so much over the last 5 years, so much since even just since Trump's been out of office. that at this stage they are a manufacturing powerhouse like which the world has never seen. And the rest of the world, including the US by comparison, is like what the US was post World War II to the rest of the world. No one could compete. We were the only ones. And I think from a manufacturing power perspective, that's where China is today. And that makes it impossible for the US to just simply do as it pleases. And so
Well, I think that makes sense, Matt, because it appears that if the US wanted to take the manufacturing of iPhones and stuff of that nature from China and bring it here, it's near impossible to do for lots of different reasons. So forget about that. And the automobile industry, if BYD can make a competent high-tech car and sell it for ten to $12,000, whatever the number is, that's impossible in the US. You'd
it's
have to
impossible.
impossible just with the unions to start with. They would make it impossible. So yeah. So, but wait a minute. Uh, so how does spending $1 trillion, it depends on how they allocate these things, what they call defense and so forth. But let's say if defense spending right now, the way they account for it is 800 billion, and he says $1 trillion, well, what are they going to spend that extra money on? Build more aircraft carriers, which are basically the equivalent of battleships before World War II? That doesn't make any sense. Does it make any sense to build more F-22s, which are, I'm not saying that they're flying coffins, but they're the main advantage of this defense item is that it's stealthy. But wait a minute, where do you use fighter planes these days? I mean, it's all about missiles, which are much cheaper, can do a lot. At most, those F-22s are missile delivery systems, but they don't have to be all that stealthy for that. So what's that about? And now Trump is talking about building a new fighter called the F-47. But man, fighters are just on, this is all crazy. And he's spending more money. So
No, my
defending
guess,
who?
yeah, it's again, it's not defending people. It's retaining the power to do as we will. I think that that's the fundamental imperative. That's what's driving it. And so what we see with the tariffs, and when you with the tariff, the structure of the tariffs is it looks insane to a rational person coming into it. One, they say tariffs are bad for the economy. The American consumers will be worse off. All those normal standard tariff arguments, I think, are beside the point because under the national security imperative, where China is the problem, uh, whether or not it's better for the American consumer or whether or not it's even better for the American economy over the long term, I think is a secondary concern. The first concern is to try to do what they can to isolate China, which is why I think these tariffs were fairly arbitrary in the way that they were done. For instance, it's not just countries, they claim it's basically trying to make up for the deficit that we have with each of these countries, but there are countries like Australia whom we have no trade deficit with, who still is under this tariff regime. Now, why would that be? My theory is because they are going to put every country in a position where they have to choose us or them. You're with us or you're against us.
Oh, God. And considering how much I hated that baby Bush who coined that, popularized that meme, this impresses me as a very bad idea. Why does Trump feel that he needs to, you know, perhaps we're just caught up in one of the great movements of history. This is
It's
this is
Thucydides trap, or how do you?
Thucydides, yes, right. Where the the point, I don't know that Thucydides really made this point so clearly, but a historian recently called it Thucydides' dilemma, where a failing uh, large power decides that it needs to strike now before the rising power becomes much stronger than it is, so that the U.S. is in the position of, well, it goes back to the Peloponnesian War. So, do we really want a war with China? Because you can't win such a war if there's
Yeah, what would victory look like? I'm not sure. And there are enough countries that are clearly on China's side, or just more naturally, socially, demographically, whatever, aligned regionally with China already. So, it's like uh, it's a disaster. But
and Americans never want to feel that we're the bad guys. But a lot of people who are not Americans look at the country and they say, wait a minute, these Americans have 800 military bases outside the US, and we don't like foreign troops in our country, everything else. We don't like that. It's the US that's been attacking countries, uh, well, Panama, Grenada. There's always good reasons for this, bombing Yemen right now. I mean, where's the declaration of war against Yemen? I mean, what have the Yemenis ever done to the US? And the answer is absolutely nothing, because we didn't even have any traffic going through the Suez Canal, which is what they're all about with Israel. So a lot of people are saying, the US has gotten out of control,
yeah, I totally agree.
confiscating the assets of foreign citizens, foreign countries like Russia. I mean, it's uh, it's like we're in a death spiral at
We
this
are.
point.
And you can see it's one indicator that it's not simply about trade is that Scott Bessent today floated the idea that it's possible that we would delist Chinese companies.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's a real, and this is another thing. Delist Chinese companies. Trump is saying we want these foreigners to invest in the United States. But it wasn't so long ago that the US didn't need any foreign investment. We had all the capital in the world, and we, Americans, invested all over the world in foreign countries. We didn't need, their nickels and dimes, but now the shoe's on the other foot. We need them to invest in this country. But wait a minute, if that's true, which I'm afraid it is now, uh, things like arbitrarily delisting a country's shares, people are going to say, wait a minute, do I really want to put money into the US? There must be a better place to put money. It's potentially dangerous. It's not what it used to be, safe.
And it's not just the US doing this. It was floated in the EU last week relating to American companies.
Hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, this is this is like this is like a game. This is like a game of chicken played between two drunk teenagers, where you throw a knife and it goes into one guy's foot. Well, I'll throw my knife into your foot. Well, you both get hurt. There's nobody who wins that. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and I think eventually that I think they keep throwing knives until they go into someone's throat, actually, I think is where we're heading. And I guess the idea is if you got enough countries, because ultimately China is a production economy, not a consumption economy. Most countries are net importers of Chinese goods, unless you're providing raw materials to China. So that's the only case where this isn't true. Every other country is a net importer, and if you can then, um, so the countries, maybe the carrot of the American consumer isn't big enough to get China to do what we want them to do because they've surpassed that. They're at a level where they're not going to be pushed around. But maybe they can get a coalition of the willing, enough other countries who say, no, we want access to the U.S. consumer market because we're, production economies. We need the U.S. consumer, and we're willing to forego the trade with China. And so, if they can cut down China's access to enough markets. And if you can, the one weak link that China has is with fossil fuels still. They do need oil from other countries. Most of it comes from Russia or from the Middle East. If you can cut off their access to that, maybe they think that they can weaken them enough that they could somehow regain some advantage. I mean, these are the only two major pieces of the puzzle that I could figure out so far as to how they might think this could accomplish this weakening of China. And in the process, it'll weaken the US. But if they think it'll hurt China more, they'll do it because of the national security imperative.
Yeah, which is basically crazy because we don't have national security, and it's just the people in the government that are thinking about what's good for the government. I mean, this is actually all quite insane what's going on around us. Uh, and it occurs to me that a country which produces stuff, makes profits through their manufacturing, uh, they're in the catbird seat. A country that just has a currency which it's able to print up willy-nilly, like the US, just consuming and buying, we're not in a power seat.
Or not. But imagine from their perspective, and I disagree with it. Their perspective is, well, if not now, then when? Because it gets worse by the day. Our debts get worse, our manufacturing capacity gets worse, and every day China gets substantially stronger. And if you just the difference between now and 5 years ago is remarkable what they can do on the production side. It's unbelievable, actually, the changes in that period. So if you just not on any exponential growth curve, but now we have AI and robotics, so maybe you could have an exponential growth curve, but just on a linear curve, it'll be totally impossible for the U.S. to make a stand much later than now.
I'm afraid that that's true. Uh, and that reminds me of the fact nobody's talking about the Ukraine anymore. It's like the news cycle has driven on, but the war is still continuing. And we might ask ourselves, well, why is that war still continuing? Because the Ukraine has nothing. It has no money. It has no men. It has no material, artillery shells, no matter what it is. It's continuing because the US, which is to say Trump, is still sponsoring the Ukraine. What's going on there? Incidentally, I don't mention the Ukraine uh, because I'm wearing my Zelensky pullover today. You'll notice that it's kind of
Yeah.
olive drab. It's not to celebrate Zelensky. It's because it's a chilly day here on the farm today, but it just happens to be the Zelensky pullover,
Yeah.
all military colors that I'm wearing.
Well, here's
What's
here's
going on
my
with the Ukraine?
here's my theory. If it is all national security imperatives and China is the enemy, then it would explain all of the many recent attacks that have been carried out on Russia's oil production and refining capability, because they are a major source of oil and natural gas to China. It's one of the few choke points the U.S. still, it's one of the few things that China needs from the world is oil, and they get it from Russia and they get it from the Middle East primarily. They get some, and from Malaysia. Malaysia is a big part of it, but it's harder to cut Malaysia out of the mix. But it's much, much easier if you can degrade Russia's ability to be able to deliver gas and oil to China. And if there's a problem in the Middle East, which would stem the flow of oil, that also would serve this interest.
Well, Ukraine is in Europe, and Russia's oil and gas production are in the east, basically in Siberia. They're not really much in European Russia. So I don't think that that's going to. My question is, why is Trump still, he could end the war tomorrow if he just stopped supporting the Ukrainians? I mean, that's how you do it. they'd have to roll over and surrender and give the Russians what they want. And I wonder if among our listeners, this is a point which is never made anymore. They say that the Russians started this war. Yeah, they did start the war, but they were provoked into starting the war, starting with the color revolution in 2014, where the regime was changed. And then nobody ever mentions the fact that immediately those Russian provinces, the Donbass, split off for a lot of very good reasons that they didn't want to be part of the Ukraine anymore. And the Ukrainian government immediately attacked them. And there were about 30,000 casualties because of the attack of the Ukraine on those breakaway provinces. That's never mentioned. The fact that there was really massive provocation on the part of, I mean, this war should,
It should be over. It should be
it
over.
should
But
be,
so the question is
and it
why?
would be over if the U.S. stopped supporting the Ukraine.
So why is the U.S. continuing to support them?
It, God, it makes no sense at all.
I think it. I think it's
And
this reason, Doug.
can you believe anything that Trump says? Because he's constantly contradicting himself. Well, this is a problem with having absolutely no philosophical core.
Yeah, and I
And
think we can look at what he says, but you look at what he does. They turned off shipment of arms to Ukraine for, was it 72 hours or a week? I mean, it was nothing, and they're back there now. And so whatever he says, what he's doing is keeping it going. And I look at crude oil to China from Russia. It says in 2024, China imported 2.17 million barrels a day from Russia. And recent trends for the first 2 months of 2025, it says there was a notable decline of Russian oil compared to the prior year. It's down 12%. Natural gas, let's see, China. So a 40% year-on-year increase in 2024 that they're sending them, 31.6 billion cubic meters. And China imported, it says $6 billion worth of LNG also from Russia during that time period. So they're a major supplier. I mean, probably the biggest single supplier of gas and oil to China. Russia is. And if I asked ChatGPT what has been degraded in their oil production facilities by Ukraine, in the recent period. And so it says Ukraine drone strikes have led to significant damage at multiple Russian oil refineries. Notably, in 2024, they had to suspend fuel production following a drone attack. The facility processed 5.8 million tons of oil in 2024, accounting of 2.2 of Russia's total refining. Another one, uh, another refinery, let's see, was targeted, resulting in operational disruptions. The third refinery, gas processing plants attacked. Let's see, Russian reduction in refining capacity. Ukraine drone strikes have reportedly taken offline approximately 10% of Russia's oil refining capacity so far. And it's disrupting their exports. They declined by 9% from 2024 from drone strikes. And let's see. And it says the economic impact. Of course, they're saying this is all to affect Russia, to hurt Russia. But because these exports are going to China, I wonder.
well, entirely apart from the fact that we can't really believe everything or maybe anything that's reported. I mean, all we know is what we read. And frankly, maybe that's all that the US government people know. I still think back about that meeting, which was such a scandal because it was on what's that app? Because with an S.
Uh, well, they're not thinking TikTok. No.
No,
Oh,
when they were having their security meeting that
oh,
the
Signal.
Atlantic,
Signal.
exactly. Yeah, what impressed me about that meeting is that these people all sounded like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And none of them seemed to have any real objections to or uh, about the long-term effects of these things. And they were just like going along like a bunch of bobbleheads. And if you're going to do something as significant as attack another country, you should at least get into a room together, uh, not just not just chat. Or, I mean, that's no way to arrive at a rational decision. I'm
Yep.
less and less impressed with everything that the Trump regime is doing. The only thing that I am continue to be really impressed with is his anti-wokeism, which I think is great for a lot of reasons, and Doge. But will Doge be able to impose these scandalous frauds? Uh, will it be able to actually do something about it? Will something happen?
Or will it be offset so much by other increases in spending elsewhere that it makes no difference, like with the Defense Department?
Yeah, and the enemy is regrouping. I mean, the wokesters that control the existing U.S. and state governments, maybe they'll stop with lawfare, judgefare, God knows what, to keep anything happening. And these tariffs that Trump has put on, yes, I understand what his objective may be, but you're not going to rebuild manufacturing in the US in the short term. In the short term, it's going to get worse because who's going to want to, like you pointed out, who wants to build a factory in the midst of chaos?
Yeah.
It's better, just safer to just sit on your hands and see how it comes. And I don't know. It's
Yeah.
morning in America.
I think
It's
it's not
over.
morning anymore.
No, it only lasts 6 hours anyway.
Yeah, it's done. I think we're at lunchtime at least. Yeah, I think before we started recording, I was explaining that I was discussing the impact of tariffs with my wife, and she was naturally, as a consumer, like going to the consumer side and talking about these prices going up and the effect of that, that might have. And I said, to me, that I think where you're going to see action first is that if you're somebody who you know, wasn't reshoring, but you have a plant. You already do produce things in the U.S., whatever it is. Whether it's assembly of stuff you import or whatever. But you're about to engage in a major capital expenditure to expand, and then after Liberation Day comes along, and it would be very hard. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where if I'm responsible for the decisions that are made, would not put everything on pause, at least for a period of time, so I can even understand the impact it's going to have. Will it make sense for us to make this plant anymore at all? Like, have the costs ballooned so much, or are those costs going to change, or can we find other suppliers? No matter what, it's like a shovels down kind of a scenario where there's nothing that happens. And so, I think we're going to see unemployment from the producing part of our economy really go up because it would seem irrational. You spend years developing these plans and these financial models, to spend $1 billion, and you don't even know if it'll work anymore. Or maybe the payoff now is 20 years instead of 15 years, and at that point, it doesn't make sense. So, I think it's lots of things are going to be put on ice, and I think it's going to be very counterproductive.
Yeah. And in the meantime, Trump has a larger and larger credibility gap to deal with. The very fact that he calls this Liberation Day, how does that, how does Liberation Day relate to anything that's going on today? No wonder the leftists all say that he's a pathological liar. Well, maybe he's not lying. He thinks, yeah, it'll liberate uh, us one way or another. But when you use hyperbole that is so disconnected from normal sense of reality of how words are used, it sounds like a lie.
Well, and he did make a direct lie. I watched his speech where he's rolling out the tariff regime, and he holds up his chart and he says, "This is what they charge us for tariff, but we're nice guys, and we're only going to charge them half of that." And the truth is they used a more complicated way to calculate it that didn't have uh, incorporated in it may or may not have been the actual reciprocal tariffs. It depended on the case. But he presented it to the American people as though this is what they charge us. So we're just going to charge them half of that. That's more than fair. I watch it and I go, that's perfectly reasonable. And then I find out that that's actually not what those numbers are at all. They were completely misrepresented. And that was a direct lie. So, I mean, he could have maybe just that maybe he thinks that the American people, and maybe they are too dumb to understand the more complex approach that they're using to the whole thing. So he just lies to everybody instead because, we're too dumb. I don't know.
All these contradictions, the extra $200 billion of military spending, what the hell can you spend all that on? And who are you going to use that against? Are you going to attack somebody? I mean, this is all crazy.
Here's my theory. I could be wrong, but I think it's to secure the supply chains of these important minerals and refining that we have been cut off from China. I think that's what it is. I think it's going to go into that being because that's the only thing that makes sense. There are these things that we must have. China has said, well, we're not giving them to you anymore. They control 80 or 90% of the market around it. There aren't enough we can buy anywhere else. And we have to have those supply chains constructed in some way in order to be able to make sure that we can build bombs. The stuff we already built, we can't build any of it without it. So I think it's around that.
Well, maybe it is, but these uh, strategic minerals, the actinides on the periodic table, they're not rare earths. They're actually quite common. And we had a rare earth industry in the US several decades ago, but it was shut down for environmental reasons. It could be reactivated. It's not like all the rare earths in the world are concentrated in China. It's about refining them in China, and you can't refine them in the US because of the environmental people. So maybe they're going to close down the EPA too, which would be a good thing.
Or
But
maybe the DoD doesn't have to meet environmental standards.
maybe not. And of course, the next thing is that uh, they'll say, well, not only are they hurting us, ripping us off with their tariffs on their people, which is who pays tariffs. It's the recipient country that pays them. But 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 the Chinese government is subsidizing their companies. Well, I think that's good. If they're doing something that's economically stupid, that's losing money and destroying capital, wait a minute. That's helping us, the fact that they're giving us something cheaper for nothing, frankly. But then what Trump is likely to do is say, well, we need to subsidize our industries. So we'll give billions and billions, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars to industries that I think are important here in the US. Now you're at an industrial policy. This is what you call full economic fascism, cooperation of the
Yes.
state with corporations. This is going down a bad road.
It is exactly. And one of the first insights I had in studying their plan was it sure seems to me like they want to copy the China model. I mean,
Yeah.
that just seemed obvious that they want to copy the China model. They look at it and they go, well, that's working. But what we're doing is not working according to what their standards are. And so they're going to adopt as much of those things as possible. And one of them is it is economic fascism. And I think we're going to see that in a way that surprises people going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want any part of the stock market. I don't want any part of the bond market. Uh, Things are going to get rough.
Well, and they have been rough, Doug, over the last several days. I'm just, well, what's your take on that, on the market activity? I mean, things, it's up today, I guess. It's got let's see, where are we at right now? Dow Jones is up, 0.4%. The S&P is up 0.5%. NASDAQ is up 1.4%. Gold is up over $100 an ounce also.
That
Uh,
is the interesting thing. $100 in one day.
what do you make of it?
Well, I think the problem is that where are you going to put your money? Stock market is at one of its most overpriced times in history. It's like 1929 or the mid 60s or like 2000. That's the same bubble
Even,
level. So
even after the declines recently.
even after the decline. So do you really want to be in stocks? The answer is no, it's imprudent. That's why Buffett was selling uh, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of stocks. Do you want to be in the bond market when it's a triple threat to your capital? I mean, the dollar that it's denominated in is going down the toilet, and Trump wants a weaker dollar. Interest rates are going higher for lots of reasons, and the default risk is huge. So, no, you don't want bonds either. So, where are you going to put your money? And it comes
Well,
down to gold, the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability.
and it historically or in previous times of market disruption, the 10-year, the 10-year bond in particular, it really went up. I mean, a lot of money poured into it, getting out of the risky assets into the safe ones. But it turns out now the 10-year is moving up. It did get in the worst of it for a certain point last week. It got down to 3.99 something, percent. But it is up to, what is it at right now? I mean, it's at 4.44, up well, actually 4.3% today.
That's a big, big move in a short period of time for a bond. So, if I was the Chinese, I would be unloading all of my US securities wholesale, quite frankly.
Yeah, and for clarification, when the interest rate on the bond goes up, that means that the price of the bond is going down,
Yeah.
right? So as I talked about it going up, because that's just they're measuring the interest rate. So what that implies is that people are selling their 10 years. They're liquidating those at a pretty big number, 4%, 4.3% down today, and their money is going elsewhere. And perhaps some of that is going into gold, which during the financial crisis, it did not work out like this. The market got wild, all the stocks went down, the 10-year went up, gold got crushed also. And this time it's different. Something new is happening, it seems.
Yeah. I remain a bull on gold, even though relative to most other things, gold is now reasonably priced, but it's going a lot higher because we're looking at financial chaos.
Financial chaos. In our conversation with Frank Juster last week, he's always a very reasonable person, always very, I'd say
Very understated, understated.
yes. And he has if anything, when, conversations between you and him, he's a moderating force,
Yeah,
would you say? But he seemed
definitely.
concerned.
Yeah, 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 he is. And he's in a position to know things that most people don't know running the International Crisis Group, which monitors these things all over the world. Yeah.
So what should we be most concerned about right now, Doug?
Well, we can talk about the world situation, but we can't do anything about it. So charity begins at home. And I think if anybody listening doesn't have a good pile, whatever a good pile might be for your personal financial situation, of gold coins and a bunch of silver coins, and it's time to rig for heavy running. I mean, that's the first thing you do. Get out of leverage because anything could happen. We could have a deflationary collapse before the dollar is ultimately destroyed. And if you can get a second job now to bring in more income while things are still held together with chewing gum and baling wire, do that. This is a time to, gird things up while the sun is shining, because in the future, there's going to be a lot of unemployed people. There's all these distortions in the economy that Trump is unwinding through Doge. That's good, but then he's putting in a whole bunch of new distortions with his tariffs and God knows what else. So that the result will be financial and economic chaos. It's not going to be good.
Time we good. Even silver is up today, almost 3%. It's at $30.42. So highly speculative compared to gold, but even that is up today.
Yeah. So that's where you've got to go. And eventually, maybe now, all these crappy little gold stocks will once again have their day in the sun and be treated as the next alternative to meme coins in the crypto world.
Yeah, that's right. I had GDX, which is the major index fund for major gold miners, is up 5.5% today. There's a junior version of that, and the junior version is up a little bit more, 5.6% today. So they're looking good today, at least. But the one, unlike most of the rest of the market, these things at least were incredibly cheap already.
Yeah, they
Not
were. And of course, one of the things that Trump wants to do, which makes sense, is make it easier to mine and process things in the United States, which means that the reserves or resources, in most cases, that these companies have in various metals will become more valuable because you'll actually be able to do something with them in a reasonable period of time. That's
right.
the major thing. I mean, there's some good things that Trump is doing, no question about it.
Yep. And I think the key thing, the message we want to convey today is that everything that's being done, if you look at through the national security imperative as we imagine they see it, that China is the major opposing force, and they need to counter China where they can. And part of that in countering them is, I think, definitely be getting access to minerals. Then it would, and I think maybe even through the Defense Department directly. I think that I thought this before, but I think this just validates the idea that there will be a mining boom. That there really will be because they got to get it away from China, and China's got a stranglehold on it, almost all of it right now.
Right. And one of the major reasons why big fund managers have not been buying and owning mining and energy stocks is DEI and ESG. But those are being washed away so that they'll stop buying this stuff again. Nope, I'm optimistic. I think the worm has turned. And all these crappy little mining stocks, the worst business in the world, I think will cyclically be, I think they're going to be hot stocks in the next couple of years. Famous last words.
I think so too. I'm optimistic on that front, on the portfolio front, and we cover all this stuff within our paid newsletter. You can get it at crisisinvesting.com. I encourage you to subscribe to that. But I'm also very pessimistic about the reshaping of the global order and how it really could. You can see a plausible path as to how this actually leads to a World War III. I mean, you can really see it coming. And hopefully it can be avoided, but if national security imperatives are driving the actions and some of these actions are wild, they can, I mean, if we're trying to cut off oil from China, boy, this just reminds me of World War II. I mean, isn't this how we got into, we went to war with Japan?
Absolutely. It's one reason why I feel physically a lot safer in many ways, actually, down here in the Southern Cone in Uruguay and Argentina, certainly than I do when I go back to the US, where my place in Virginia on the Chesapeake is way too damn close to Virginia Beach and Norfolk and Newport News.
You're in the blast zone.
That's the blast zone. Those are some of the biggest naval bases in the world, right down the road. And it
Yeah.
makes me a little bit edgy.
Yeah, it's understandable. Okay, well, I think we'll just leave it at that for today, Doug, unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
Nope, I think we covered a lot of ground. And this Friday, what are we going to have? Questions from
This
people that
Friday,
have
we'll have
reactions
questions.
or
Yeah,
arguments?
questions from members of the file. So if you're a subscriber to Crisis Investing, you get access to File, which is a private member group, and I solicit questions from that group, and then we answer them occasionally here, usually on Fridays. So if you've got a question for Doug, join Crisis Investing, and you'll have the opportunity to get it answered.
Or an argument or an objection. I want to know where I'm wrong. I don't like to feel like I'm living in a bubble, which I'm afraid is where Trump is living. Well, all of us live in our own little silos. So
We all do. We all do.
tell us
The
where we're
question,
wrong.
yeah, the question is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand a world that is changing so fast and is so complex, and the people who could tell us what's going on do not. So we have to guess
National security, what are you talking about?
precisely. So we have to guess, and we're making the best guesses we can in real time. And if people have a different take on it, we'd love to hear it. So you can put in the comments this video also. If you disagree with what we're saying, explain why. Don't just say we're idiots or we can't see how genius Trump is yet. That doesn't help. Like, let us know what we're doing, what we might be missing, because we read the comments.
Right. A little bit of critical thinking is always welcome.
Absolutely is. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Doug. We'll talk to you on Friday.
Thanks, Matt.